Short is the story, long is the life.
Liu Kang's Archive presents China Urban Legends, the Jinci Temple of Taiyuan. Lao Yang tells eerie tales. Hello everyone. Today I'm going to talk about a place, the Jinci Temple in Taiyuan, Shanxi Province. Section 1. The first time I learned about the rule that no one could stay overnight at Jinci Temple was in the autumn of 2018. In September of that year, I followed a documentary crew to Taiyuan. The crew was filming an episode about ancient architecture in Shanxi, and Jinci Temple was the main attraction. This temple complex sits at the foot of Xuanweng Mountain in the southwestern part of Taiyuan, backed by the mountain and facing water, covering over 100,000 square meters. Just among the existing ancient buildings over 300 years old, there are more than a dozen. In terms of historical status, Jinci Temple is among the first batch of National Key Cultural Relics Protection Units, ranking in the top 3 of Shanxi's ancient architecture circle, on the same level as the Yungang Grottos in Datong and the Yingzhen Wooden Pagoda. Our crew stayed in Taiyuan for 12 days. The first 2 days we shot the Twin Pagoda Temple and Chunyang Palace on the outskirts of the city. On the third day, we officially entered Jinci Temple. I was the production coordinator's assistant, mainly responsible for coordinating venues, arranging shooting schedules, and liaising with the management office. The work wasn't complicated, but because Jinci Temple's opening hours were from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m., our daily shooting window was only 10 hours, time was very tight. On the morning of our first day at Jinci Temple, I took the shooting plan to the management office to process the formalities. The management office was in a small courtyard east of the main gate of Jinci Temple, 2 rows of bungalows, with several pomegranate trees planted at the entrance. The trees were heavy with red pomegranates the size of fists, fully ripe, but no one had picked them. They had split open, revealing the densely packed seeds inside. The office director was a woman in her 40s, surnamed Cheng, wearing a pair of silver-rimmed glasses. She spoke crisply and decisively, the type of person who had worked at a grassroots cultural relics unit for half her life. She never slacked on any procedure, but she also never let you bargain over any rule. Director Cheng looked over our shooting plan, checked each item one by one, signed where needed, and stamped where required. As she closed the folder, she glanced at me and said one thing: no one can stay overnight. I thought she was referring to the closing time of the park. I said we knew, we would clear out promptly at 6 p.m. every day, and we would be gone before the security guards did their final sweep.
That's not what I mean. I mean, no one can spend the night inside Jinci Temple. Anyone. Not allowed.
I said we had no intention of spending the night in the park, but if we needed to shoot night scenes or fill in some empty shots, could we apply for an extended shooting time? We had all the proper filming permits.
Shook her head, tone flat but with zero room for negotiation. No. No extended shooting, no nighttime shooting. No one stays in the park after dark, that's an iron rule. Paused, then added, even we management office staff all evacuate before dark. The night shift is not inside the park, it's at the guard booth by the gate.
At the time, I thought this rule was a bit strange. I had dealt with quite a few ancient architecture units in Shanxi, Pingyao Ancient City, Wang Family Courtyard, Hanging Temple. I'd been to them all. Generally, cultural relics units have night duty rules, for fear of fires, theft. For a place like Jinci Temple, with Song Dynasty wooden structures, a 3,000-year-old Zhou Dynasty cypress, and national treasure-level painted sculptures, it should be under 24-hour guard. How could they not even have their own management staff stay inside the park at night? But I didn't press the issue. Some grassroots units have complicated rules, maybe related to the allocation of security funds, or maybe because there were no dedicated staff dormitories inside the park. I didn't think much of it at the time. But what happened later made me realize that this rule had a very strict reason behind it, and that reason had a direct connection to the most precious set of artifacts inside Jinci Temple. Section 2. Jinci Temple has 3 treasures and 3 wonders. The 3 treasures are the Sage Mother Hall, the Fish Pond Flying Bridge, and the Sacrificial Hall, 3 wooden structures from the Song and Qing dynasties, among the oldest surviving wooden building complexes in China. The 3 wonders are the Zhou Dynasty cypress, the never-aging spring, and the Song Dynasty maid statues. And among these, the hardest to face calmly are the 43 Song Dynasty painted clay maid statues inside the Sage Mother Hall. The Sage Mother Hall is the main hall of Jinci Temple. It faces east, with 7 bays in width and 6 bays in depth, a double-eave hip and gable roof, and sits on a platform over a meter high. This hall was built in the 9th year of the Taiping Xinguo reign of the Northern Song Dynasty, AD 984, over 1,000 years ago. In front of the hall stand 8 carved wooden dragon pillars, each with a different dragon, some with heads raised upward, some looking down, some with claws gripping the pillar, bodies twisted and coiled, as if struggling on the pillar, about to fly out at any moment. After 1,000 years of wind and sun, the wood surfaces have turned grayish-brown, cracks filled with dust, but the forms of the dragons remain clear, the horns on their heads, the teeth in their mouths, the scales on their bodies, all finely carved. Even the curve of the dragon whiskers is visible. The first time I stood in front of the hall and looked up at those coiled dragons, I had a very strange feeling. Those dragons' eyes, no matter which angle you stood at, seemed to be watching you. Inside the Sage Mother Hall is enshrined the Sage Mother Yijiang, the mother of Tang Shuyu, the founding feudal lord of the state of Jin in the early Western Zhou dynasty, wife of King Wu of Zhou, and daughter of Jiang Zia. The statue of the Sage Mother sits upright in the central shrine, wearing a phoenix crown and rainbow-colored cape, with a benevolent expression. Standing on either side are a group of maids. These 43 Song Dynasty maid statues are called the Venus of the East in Chinese sculpture history. Completely unlike the stereotypical bodhisattva statues found in other temples, each maid statue has a different facial expression, body posture, clothing, and ornamentation. Their heights range from 1.5 meters to 1.7 meters, almost exactly like real people. Some hold seals, some hold cloths, some hold dressing boxes, some hold pipas, some tilt their heads as if listening, some bow their heads as if thinking, some have the corners of their mouths slightly raised as if smiling, some have slightly furrowed brows as if worried. These statues are not gods or Buddhas, not lofty religious icons, they are a group of living ancient palace maids, frozen by a craftsman from 1,000 years ago with clay and paint in a single moment. The first day I walked into the Sage Mother Hall, it was around 2 p.m. The light inside the hall was very dim. For the protection of cultural relics, no strong lights could be installed in the hall, only natural light. The autumn sun slanted in through the doorway, casting a long strip of light on the gray brick floor, with dust floating in the beam. Those maid statues stood in the darkness beyond the light strip, row after row. From a distance, they looked like a group of real people standing in the shadows, standing quietly, patiently, motionlessly, as if they had been standing for a very long time, waiting for someone to return. Their faces were indistinct in the darkness, only faintly visible outlines, and the colors of their painted garments, vermilion, malachite green, apricot yellow, indigo blue, colors popular in the Song Dynasty, faded after 1,000 years but still vivid. At the very front stood 2 maids, one holding a jade rui scepter, the other holding a white porcelain vessel, their gazes level ahead, postures dignified. The arrangement of the maids behind seemed to follow some hierarchical order, the closer to the Sage Mother, the more elaborate the clothing and the more serious the expression. Those in the back, with relatively simpler clothing, had slightly more relaxed expressions, some with lips slightly parted as if whispering to the person next to them. That day I stood in the hall for a long time. Not to study, just to look. There was an indescribable attraction. Those maid statues were too realistic, so realistic that they made you feel they weren't made of clay, but that a group of real people had been sealed inside. Later, I learned that I wasn't the only one who had this thought. Section 3. On the third day of formal shooting, a small incident occurred. That afternoon, the crew was shooting supplementary details inside the Sage Mother Hall, close-ups of the sculpture details, texture of the paint, details of the dragon pillars. The cinematographer, Old Ma, was a Shanxi local in his 40s who had worked at the Provincial TV station for 20 years and had shot countless ancient buildings. He carried his camera around the hall, finished the required footage, and as he was wrapping up, said something to me.
When I was shooting the Sage Mother statue just now, in the viewfinder I saw something a bit off around the corner of her mouth, looked like a water stain. I wiped the lens and looked again, and it was gone. Probably just light reflection.
I didn't think much of it. Light and shadow changes are normal in ancient buildings.
But I'll say this, I shot close-ups of the Sage Mother's face several times. Each time I played it back, the curve of her mouth seemed slightly different. The first take, the Sage Mother's mouth corners were slightly upturned, like a smile. The second time I shot it, same angle, same lighting, the corners seemed to have flattened a bit. Shakes head, I know it's impossible. Probably just eye strain after a day of shooting.
That evening after wrap, I went back to the hotel and flipped through the day's sample footage. I specifically looked at the shots of the Sage Mother's face. The statue of Sage Mother Yijang maintained a dignified and calm expression, a full forehead, a straight nose bridge, eyes half closed, lips tightly pressed, with a very slight upward curve at the corners of the mouth. This was the classic lofty ancient smile of Song Dynasty Buddhist statues, a standard expression with lips lightly closed and corners slightly raised, seen on ancient statues from the Song, Liao, and Qing dynasties all over the country. Nothing unusual. But Old Ma's words kept nagging at me, that the same statue's mouth corners looked different at different times. At the time, I thought it was a lighting issue and didn't think much more about it. But what happened later proved that Old Ma's intuition was right. Section 4. On the sixth day at Jinci Temple, I had a chat with an old man who was a gatekeeper. His surname was Jia, 67 years old. He had been a gatekeeper at Jinci Temple for 15 years. He lived in the guard booth on the east side of the main gate, a room with a bed, a table, an old television, and on the bedside table, an enamel tea mug with the words Taiyuan City Model Worker Commemoration printed in red, most of the paint worn off. The mug was always filled with strong tea, leaves taking up more than half the mug, the liquid black like soy sauce. Old man Jia also knew about that rule, no one could stay in the park after dark. But his angle was different from Director Cheng's.
This rule wasn't set by the management office. It was already in place before I came. They say it's been around since the Republic of China era. The specific origin is unclear, but there's a very specific reason passed down by word of mouth for nearly 100 years. They say that among the 43 maid statues in the Sage Mother Hall, after dark, 2 of them switch positions on their own.
At the time, I thought he was joking.
Took a sip of tea, unhurried. I know it sounds absurd. But among the old employees at Jinci, more than one person has seen this kind of thing. And more than once. They say during the Republic era, around the 1920s-30s, some Japanese soldiers were stationed at Jinci. There was a Japanese officer who didn't believe the stories. He took 2 soldiers and crouched at the entrance of the Sage Mother Hall for an entire night. The next morning, that Japanese officer came out with a face as white as paper. Without a word, he pulled his unit out. What exactly he saw, no one knows.
Old man Jia said that after liberation, Jinci was listed as a provincial protected unit. During the 10 years of turmoil, Red Guards from Taiyuan came to Jinci, wanting to smash the statues in the Sage Mother Hall. At that time, the old curator of the management office, along with several staff members, blocked the entrance of the hall and said one thing to the Red Guards, "Old man Jia, as old curator, if you want to smash them during the day, I won't stop you. But if you have the guts, come at night." Of course, the Red Guards didn't believe in superstition. But whether anyone came that night, no one knows. The next morning, a large basin of water had been splashed on the brick floor in front of the Sage Mother Hall, with water stains stretching all the way to the back of the sacrificial hall. Some said it was the administrator himself who splashed the water, to scare the Red Guards with a supernatural trick. Others said it wasn't. But regardless, that time, not a single statue in Jinci Temple was smashed. Old man Jia told these stories in a very flat tone, like he was telling an old tale that had nothing to do with him. But I noticed one detail: when he talked about the maid statues switching positions, the phrase "two of them" was spoken with absolute certainty. Not "someone saw the maid statues move," not "they seemed to be in a different place," but "two of them switched positions on their own." He seemed to know far more than he was willing to say. Section 5. That night, after returning to the hotel, I searched online for information about the Jinci maid statues. There is a lot of research on the Song Dynasty painted sculptures at Jinci. People from the art world, architecture field, and history field have all written articles. Most are serious academic papers discussing sculpture techniques, costume research, Song Dynasty court systems, and so on. But a few informal articles mentioned a very interesting phenomenon: the aliveness of the Jinci maid statues. That word wasn't mine. It had been used by people for who knows how many years. A local gazetteer from the Republic of China period recorded a passage saying the Jinci maids have vivid expressions, and no observer fails to mistake them for living people. Various travelogues, essays, and reports from later years also repeatedly used similar phrases: lifelike, ready to step out, standing before them, you forget they are made of clay. A late Qing dynasty scholar from Taiyuan named Liu Dapeng wrote in his diary that when he first entered the Sage Mother Hall during the day, he was startled, because the light was dim, and upon entering, he thought the hall was filled with a group of real people. But what truly caught my attention wasn't those public documents, it was something I found in a less formal place. There was a small village next to Jinci Temple. An old man from that village had posted an oral account online. He said that when he was young, around the early 1970s, he had worked as a night patrol at Jinci Temple for a while. He said at that time, there was a grave robbing trend among the villages near Jinci. Although Jinci was a state-protected unit, no one was specifically guarding it at night, so a few villagers were borrowed as auxiliary security. He was one of them. He said nothing happened in the first week of patrolling. In the second week, one night around 11 p.m., he walked to the entrance of the Sage Mother Hall and heard a sound coming from inside. He said it wasn't footsteps, nor was it talking, it was the sound of wood rubbing against wood, very soft, like someone slowly dragging a very heavy chair. He said he had a flashlight and a carrying pole in his hands at the time. He stood at the entrance for about 5 minutes, legs trembling the whole time. The wood-on-wood friction sound lasted for about 10 seconds and then stopped. He didn't dare go in. The next day during daylight, he went specifically to check the Sage Mother Hall. Everything inside was normal. But he noticed one detail: the floor of the Sage Mother Hall was paved with gray bricks, on which a thin layer of dust had settled. About 2 steps in front of the middle row of maid statues, there were several shallow scratch marks on the gray bricks. Not like rat claw marks, those scratches were straight, regular, for parallel lines, evenly spaced, like marks left by something being dragged. The old man said he had never told anyone about this, because he knew no one would believe him, and instead, they might think he was trying to steal something from Jinci and made up a story to cover himself. I've always believed that you can't fully trust things found on the internet. But the detail that old man described, the scratches on the gray bricks, was too specific, too concrete to seem fabricated. And he had nothing to gain from it. He was just an ordinary peasant in his 70s or 80s, recounting something from 50 years ago. No one knew his name, and he left no contact information. As I looked back at that oral account, I remembered what old man Jia said. After dark, two of the maid statues switched positions on their own. The scratches on the bricks, the drag marks, the two statues switching positions, these pieces of information linked together in my mind like puzzle pieces, suddenly snapping into perfect alignment. Section 6. I wanted to verify old man Jia's claim about 2. I found an official floor plan of the Sage Mother Hall and the layout of the maid statues. There are 43 Song Dynasty painted sculptures inside the Sage Mother Hall, 1 statue of the Sage Mother, 5 statues of eunuchs, and 37 statues of female attendants. Aside from the tall statue of the Sage Mother in the center, the other 42 maid statues are arranged on both sides of the hall, 22 on the left, 20 on the right, in 2 rows, front and back. I spent an entire morning taking screenshots frame by frame from the video our crew shot in the Sage Mother Hall, and compared them with old photos of the Jinci maid statues available online, the earliest ones dating back to the 1920s. I gathered old photos from the late Qing to Republic era, survey photos taken by the Provincial Cultural Relics Bureau in the 1950s, a Jinci picture album published in the 1980s, and our crew's high-definition footage from this year, and compared them all, statue by statue. I wasn't sure what I would find. After all, nearly a century had passed, and even without paranormal incidents, the statues could have been moved during repairs or maintenance. I spent a full 3 hours. The conclusion sent chills down my spine. I didn't know if I was right or wrong, but if my judgment was correct, old man Jia's number was almost exactly accurate. The second maid from the left in the 3rd row, one with empty hands, originally holding an object that had rotted away to nothing, and the 5th maid from the right in the back row, one standing with hands at her sides, her head tilted slightly to the left. Their positions were inconsistent across the old photos from different periods. In photos from the 1920s, the maid with hands at her sides was on the left. In photos from the 1950s, she appeared on the right. In the 1980s album, she was back on the left. And in the footage reshot this time, she was back on the right. Among the 43 maid statues, only these 2 had changed positions. Exactly 2, just as old man Jia said. And I noticed something else. Each time the positions changed, it happened to coincide with years when Jinci underwent major repairs or significant social upheaval. The change from the 1920s to the 1950s spanned the War of Resistance against Japan and the Chinese Civil War. The change from the 1950s to the 1980s spanned that 10-year turmoil. And from the 1980s to now, Jinci had entered a completely peaceful and stable period of cultural relic protection. They had stayed put for more than 40 years. I don't know what this pattern means. It could just be coincidence. Maybe during structural repairs, the statues were indeed moved, but the records were lost. In grassroots cultural relics units, this kind of thing isn't uncommon. But there was one thing I couldn't explain. From the 1920s to the 1950s, the 2 maid statues swapped positions. I could attribute that to wartime chaos. From the 1950s to the 1980s, they swapped again. I could attribute that to the turmoil's movement of relics. But from the 1980s to now, with no repair records, no relocation archives, no loan exhibition records, how had they returned to the right side on their own? If they truly needed more than 40 years of stability to stop moving, then were they now steady on the right? Or were they just temporarily parked there, waiting for the next break in the causal chain, to silently return to the left once again? Section 7. On the afternoon of the wrap-up day, our crew finished all the shooting. Equipment was packed, ready to head back to Beijing the next morning. I went to the Sage Mother Hall alone, as a farewell. It was already October. Autumn in Taiyuan ends early. North winds were blowing from the other side of the mountain. The hall was colder than when I had first entered a week ago. The setting sunlight slanted in through the doorway, and the dust particles floating in the beam were thicker than before, tumbling up and down in the column of light. The maid statues stood in the increasingly dim light, vermilion robes turned dark brown, malachite green sashes turned blackish green. Their faces dissolved into the shadows, leaving only outlines. I don't know if I was being too sensitive. I stood in front of the second maid from the left in the third row. She bowed her head slightly, her hands clasped in front of her, with an oval-shaped space between them, the spot where the object she once held had long ago rotted away or been taken. From the slightly drooping line of her shoulders, that object must have been heavy, like a jade ruby or a bronze vessel, but no one knew what it really was anymore. She tilted her face, as if listening for something. I studied her face. Regular features, gentle and graceful countenance, very soft lines on the brow ridge. The curve of her lips was very slight, neither a smile nor a frown, a polite, silent expression somewhere in between. Her eyes were half open, half closed. The pupils were made of black glaze, reflecting faint light in the refraction. Because ceramic glaze does not deteriorate over 1,000 years, those eyes reflected light under any conditions, as if she was always looking at you, and yet as if she was only looking at the small patch of floor in front of her. You could never tell. Suddenly I noticed a detail. The first time I came, I had noticed the clothes of this maid statue. She wore a round collar, narrow-sleeved robe, tied at the waist with a vermilion belt tied in a very neat bow. But now, looking again, the orientation of the bow, the knot facing left, seemed different from what I remembered. I pulled out my phone and compared the photo I had taken of this same statue on the first day. The moment I placed the two images side by side, my heart jumped. In the first day's photo, the bow's knot faced right. But today, what I saw with my own eyes, the knot faced left. I don't know if it was a trick of the light. I don't know if it was the shooting angle. I don't know if my memory was deceiving me. But that bow had indeed changed from right-facing in the first day's photo to left-facing as seen by my naked eye. I stood there for maybe 10 seconds, then turned and walked out. When I reached the doorway, I didn't look back. Not because I didn't want to, because I didn't dare. Section 8. On the last day in Taiyuan, I talked with an old man who had lived near Jinci Temple for over 60 years. His surname was Yang, 78 years old. He was retired from the Taiyuan chemical plant, and his home was in the village east of Jinci Temple's main gate. The village was right next to the temple's outer wall, less than a 10-minute walk away. He had grown up around Jinci Temple, with very mixed feelings about it, both reverence and a bit of fear. I asked him about what happened at Jinci Temple at night. He didn't answer directly. Instead, he first asked me a question.
Have you ever heard the sound of the iron bells on the eaves of the Sage Mother Hall when the wind rises at midnight at Jinci?
I said no.
Nodded. I have. In my early years I worked the night shift. After getting off work at around 2 a.m., I would bike past Jinci Temple. One night, the iron bells on the temple eaves were jangling in the wind for over an hour. But when I got out, I looked up at the sky. There was no wind. Not a breeze. The branches around Jinci Temple were completely still. The sky the whole night was like a black cloth covered in dust, pressing down heavily.
The old man said he never took that road past Jinci at night again. He would take a 2-kilometer detour along the brightly lit city avenue. Not for any other reason, he said he wasn't afraid of seeing something. He was afraid that after seeing something, he would have no way to tell himself it wasn't real. He didn't talk about the iron bells. He didn't talk about the maids. But he said one last thing that left me stunned for a long time.
Jinci Temple over 1,000 years old. When you come, you feel it watching you. But after you leave, what then?
What did he mean? He didn't explain further. He just stood up and said he had to go pick up his grandson from school. Section 9. After returning to Beijing, I put the matter of Jinci Temple aside. But occasionally, some small detail would pull me back. Passing a red lacquered door would remind me of the vermilion pillars of the Sage Mother Hall, hearing the jangle of wind bells at a subway station, closing the lights while working late at the office, the calendar on my desk casting a slanted shadow from the sidelight that resembled the silhouette of a maid statue standing in the last rays of the setting sun. Every time I thought of it, a feeling would rise in my heart that I couldn't describe, not fear, not curiosity, but a sense that my attention was being tugged by something invisible, like I owed an answer that I hadn't given. Later, I asked a friend who works at the Shanxi Museum about the Song Dynasty painted sculptures at Jinci. She said that among cultural relic restorers, there has always been an unwritten rule about those made statues, as little movement as possible. Not something stipulated by the cultural relics law, but a trade rule passed down among several generations of restoration experts local to Jinci. If possible, don't touch their faces. If possible, don't adjust their positions. If they must be moved for cleaning or relocation, comprehensive photographic documentation must be made, not just for archival purposes, but so that if anything goes wrong, you have evidence to prove that it was like that when you got there. I asked her why. She paused for a moment, then her voice dropped a little.
You never know which one, on which day, might accidentally be moved back to its original position from the very beginning.
The way she said it was too calm. Too calm to be a casual joke. I was silent for a long time, then changed the subject. I didn't ask further. Let me add one more detail. After I got back to Beijing, I asked a friend in Shanxi to help look into the story old man Jia told about the Japanese officer. My friend works at the Shanxi Provincial Archives. He said that during the war, Japanese troops were indeed stationed at Jinci Temple, from 1938 to 1940, a logistic unit of the Japanese Independent Mixed 3rd Brigade set up a depot in the villages near Jinci. But there was no official record of any Japanese officer spending a night squatting at the Sage Mother Hall and then withdrawing. Which is normal, the Japanese wouldn't record such a thing in their own military files. But my friend found something interesting when going through the documents left by the Japanese. He said that when the Japanese withdrew from Jinci in 1940, they left behind a material inventory. The inventory listed weapons, ammunition, food, bedding, and appended a final note: the statues inside the Sage Mother Hall must not be moved. Strictly forbidden to damage. Violators will face court-martial. The Japanese had written the characters deity statues, not Buddha statues, not clay sculptures, but deity statues. This meant that whatever the Japanese commander stationed at Jinci had actually seen inside the Sage Mother Hall, he had come to regard those made statues as something far beyond mere clay, something to be treated with the utmost reverence. A trained Japanese officer, armed and with soldiers at his command, after seeing something with his own eyes, used military orders to restrain his men from touching those statues. That unsettled me more than any ghost story. There's one more thing. In the spring of 2019, the Jinci Management Office conducted a routine termite prevention inspection of the Sage Mother Hall. Technicians installed temperature and humidity sensors and vibration monitors inside the hall. While sorting through the monitoring data, they found an unexplained anomaly. Between midnight and 3 a.m., the ground near the last two maid statues on both sides of the hall recorded extremely faint, regular vibration signals. The vibration frequency was about 1 to 2 times per minute, with the signal intensity peaking around 2 a.m. The termite prevention engineers ruled out all known interference sources: no nearby construction, no subway tunnels, no heavy vehicle passage, no seismic activity. The sensor recording curves repeated at the same time every day, almost completely overlapping. Like an extremely slow heartbeat. The engineering report ultimately labeled the data as unknown environmental vibrations, further monitoring recommended. I don't know if that vibration signal is still there now. And I don't know what the results were if further monitoring was conducted. I just can't help but think, those dozens of clay-made statues inside the Sage Mother Hall, in the long 21st century, under the gaze of high-precision sensors, their bases repeatedly emitting faint vibrations against that same 900-year-old gray brick, like something inside slowly, steadily, and secretly waking up. Section 10. Another 6 months passed. By chance, I came across an article on a public account dedicated to research on ancient Shanxi architecture. It was about the digital modeling project of the Song Dynasty painted sculptures in the Sage Mother Hall of Jinci Temple. The article said that in 2021, the Shanxi Provincial Institute of Ancient Architecture Protection, in collaboration with Peking University, used 3D laser scanning technology to conduct a comprehensive digital recording of the painted sculptures in the Sage Mother Hall. Each maid statue received a digital archive with millions of high-precision 3D data points. The original goal of the project was protection, to create a high-precision digital copy, to prevent irreversible loss from future natural or human damage. The article also mentioned one thing: during the scanning process, technicians discovered very slight but regular wear marks on the bases of two maid statues. Not accumulated dust, not rat gnaw marks, but arc-shaped marks caused by repeated friction between the wooden bases and the gray brick floor, as if someone had repeatedly pushed and moved those two statues many times. The report's analysis of these marks concluded, mechanical wear marks, cause to be determined. I scrolled down the article and found a link to the original project conclusion report. At the end of the report, there was an inconspicuous footnote. The author probably thought it was just an irrelevant misunderstanding and casually wrote it in the appendix. Comparison of the 3D scanning data with old photos of the Jinci made statues taken by French sinologist Édouard Chavannes in the 1920s revealed a mirror image relationship in the positions of two statues. It cannot be ruled out that this was caused by positioning errors after historical repairs. Mirror image relationship. In other words, they had swapped positions, not just a slight left-right misalignment, not a front-to-back row change, a complete exchange. The left second became the direction of the right fifth, and the right fifth appeared in the position of the left second. As if someone, or some force, had lifted them up, turned them, and set them down, exchanging the positions of the two statues. Exactly the same layout as in the 1920s. I don't know whether the positions of those two maid statues in the 1920s photos were the original positions handed down from some earlier period, whether they had returned to some ancient stance during certain eras and then silently left again, how many times they had been moved over 900 years. 1,000 years is too long for records to survive more than a few fragments. All that remains are rules passed down by word of mouth. Don't enter the Sage Mother Hall after dark. Don't face more than two maid statues alone. Never under any circumstances spend the night inside Jinci Temple. The more I thought about the old curator's words to the Red Guards, the more unsettled I became. He said, if you want to smash them during the day, I won't stop you. But if you have the guts, come at night. That wasn't an old man bluffing. That was a man who had spent most of his life at Jinci, using a lifetime of experience to make a gamble. He knew better than anyone what happened in the park at night. He bet that those young people, hearing that, wouldn't have the courage to actually walk into the Sage Mother Hall after dark. He won that bet. But on what basis? Was it because, on some deep night, he had heard the rustle of maid skirts brushing across gray bricks? Was it because, sometime before dawn, he had glimpsed two blurry black figures exchanging positions through a crack in the door? Or was it because, one dusk when he was finishing tidying up the hall and about to lock the door, his peripheral vision caught the angle of the last maid statue in the corner, and he clearly remembered that the day before she had been facing a different direction? And after 30 years on the job, he would never make that mistake? Epilogue. Sometimes I think about why the ancients built 43 maid statues to stand in the Sage Mother Hall. What Jinci Temple enshrines is Ijiang, mother of Tang Shuyu. According to ritual protocol, it's only natural for the Sage Mother to have maids in attendance. But in other temples, the accompanying statues are usually just a few, a dozen at most, 2 dozen at most. 43, that number is too large. Abnormal. A friend from Shanxi once told me a speculation. He suspected that these 43 maid statues were not all created in the same period. He said there has always been a folk theory. Among these 43 maid statues, the earliest batch are original Northern Song Dynasty sculptures, maybe about a dozen or so. The later ones were added in the Yuan, Ming, and Qing dynasties. Each generation of artisans who added statues would try to imitate the style of the earliest Song Dynasty originals, but the resulting expressions would inevitably be slightly different. The Song maids were dignified and restrained, the Yuan ones thin and cool, the Ming ones round and friendly, the Qing ones rougher in craftsmanship, with slightly off proportions. My friend said that if you look carefully, you'll find very subtle, cross-era differences in the expressions and postures of the 43 maid statues. When he said that, I fell silent. In my mind, I ran through all 43 maid statues, trying to distinguish in memory which were Song originals and which were later additions. But I couldn't tell, not because I couldn't remember their faces, but because over 900 years, they had exchanged positions so many times that the original order had long since been scrambled. Who were the earliest dozen? Who were later additions? No one could tell anymore. Not even the villagers who had lived beside Jinci Temple for 1,000 years. Maybe even they themselves couldn't tell anymore. In the depths of midnight, when only moonlight filled the hall, they exchanged positions, perhaps not to restore some ancient order, but to find a better spot to see who was standing outside the gate. Have you ever noticed one thing? There are a great many clay-painted maid statues in Shanxi's ancient architecture, but nowhere else do you find a 3,000-year-old Zhou dynasty cypress standing nearby. Nowhere else does the Sage Mother Hall have the unique structure of the fish pond flying bridge. Nowhere else does the sound of the never-aging spring in the night sound like a group of people speaking in hushed voices. Jinci Temple is unique, not because it's the oldest or most exquisite, but because the entire area at the foot of Xuanweng mountain, water, spring, trees, hall, statues, all the elements come together to form a complete, sealed space. From the Northern Song Dynasty to now, 1,000 years, this space has almost never been broken open. When the Song Dynasty artisans finished shaping these 43 maid statues, they were not arranged in random order. The postures, heights, gaze directions, and objects in their hands, everything was strictly designed. This was not a set of decorative sculptures, it was a three-dimensional painting of palace maids, with each person standing in a specific position, with a specific identity and function. Their positions were designed, just as every line in a bagua formation has its own place. If someone, or some force, in the dead of night causes two maid statues to exchange positions, what is she doing? Is she restoring an order that was disrupted? Or is she performing a cyclical ritual? A 900-year cycle, too long for a human, long enough to turn a complete story into a legend no one understands. But for some kind of existence we cannot comprehend, it might just be a blink of an eye. All these years, I've kept one thing. It's not anything valuable, it's a small, gray-black shard of tile I picked up at the entrance of the Sage Mother Hall on the first day I entered Jinci Temple. Small, no bigger than a fingernail. The break was old, the edges worn smooth by wind. I don't know how many years it had lain on the ground. Anywhere else, it would be just a piece of building debris, but every shard at Jinci Temple could be a Song Dynasty original. I washed it clean and put it in a pencil holder on my desk. Sometimes, late at night, when I get tired of writing, I pick it up, squeeze it in my hand, turn it over to look at the faint gray-white lime layer still clinging to one side. On that lime layer, there is a thin line of cinnabar red, a vivid orange red, as if some artisan had brushed it on 900 years ago, and then I put it back and continue writing. I don't know why I keep it. Maybe it's related to what old man Yang said, when you come, you feel it watching you. But after you leave, what then? Sometimes I think, if one night I really stood at the entrance of the Sage Mother Hall, waiting for darkness to fall, waiting for moonlight to slant in through the doorway, waiting for those maid statues to cast long shadows in the moonlight, what would I see? Would I see the skirts of those two maid statues sliding slowly across the gray bricks? Would I see them walk toward each other, brush past, exchange positions in silence like two old acquaintances meeting in a palace corridor? Would I see them, after taking their new positions, tilt their heads and, with those eyes made of black glaze that would never dry up in 1,000 years, turn in unison to look at me standing in the doorway? I have never tried. And I will never try. Because some things are better left unknown than known. Those rows of maid statues standing in the shadows, they have stood there for 900 years. They will probably stand there for another 900 years. The objects they once held have long since rotted away. The pigments on their clothes are slowly flaking off. Their positions silently swap in the dead of night when no one is watching. That lofty ancient smile on their faces has never changed, neither a welcome nor a refusal, just an expression of someone who knows everything but says nothing, like a person who has seen too much to bother speaking. Do not enter the Sage Mother Hall of Jinci Temple after dark. Do not linger too long under the gaze of those 43 maid statues. Because, you can never be certain that when you walk out of the hall, the one standing at the second position from the left in the third row is still the same one you saw when you walked in. The story is finished. What do you think?